I'm Federica Fragapane, and I'm an independent information designer. And I usually work on organizations. Oh, can you see the panelists? No, you can see just my screen, right?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay. I usually work on data visualizations collaborating with magazines and organizations. I'm co-author of Planet Earth, children book for National Geographic Kids and White Star, and co-author of the Atlantico Geopolitico dell'Acqua, an atlas dealing with water-related topics. And during the years, I've collaborated with Scientific American, BBC, UN, and with Corriere della Sera, an Italian newspaper. And the range of complexity that characterizes my projects is broad, as you see, according to the usage context, the needs, and the readers. And now I show you a set of projects with different characteristics, but with a common ground of interest, with a common focus on the interest connection that a data visualization piece can create with the people who talks to. And I'm very interested in studying this connection. So a collaboration that allows me to explore my interest for visual representations is the one I have with La Lettura, the cultural supplement of the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera. And I collaborate with La Lettura, designing visualizations for visual data, a data visualization column, working on the analysis and communication of environmental, social, and cultural topics. And there are two important aspects about La Lettura I always have to mention. And the first one is related to the usage context. La Lettura is a weekly supplement. It's published during the weekend, and I often see the photographs shared by La Lettura readers, and the average one is a picture with La Lettura next to a brioche or a cup of tea in a context that suggests as the reading act is part of a lazy and relaxing Sunday morning. And knowing about this aspect is very important for my design approach to the visualizations. The second aspect is the fact that for this kind of project, I'm asked to visual experiment while providing meaningful contents. And so the intersection of these requests allows me to work on pieces that have an informative purpose, of course, but that are also next to the data hard field. So my visual design process is mainly composed of three phases: selection of topics, data analysis, and definition of a specific visual model. And I usually propose the topics to be visualized. And as communication and data visualization designers, we are people talking to people. So during the research and design process, I find useful starting from a very personal point of view, trying to put myself in the potential reader's shoes and asking myself at first, okay, what would interest me as reader? And then of course, could this topic also be interesting for someone else? I won't ever have a sure answer, of course, but I think that this exercise can be a good starting point for finding interesting stories to communicate. For the visualization, I'm going to show you I visualize data on CO2 emissions for 40 countries, analyzing the changes over time. And an important phase for me is the inspiration one. I usually spend a lot of time looking for visual inspiration, not only when I have to start a new project, but almost every day. And I really love to pay attention to the shapes, to the textures, to see what could be the hooks, the hopefully pleasant hooks to hook the reader's gaze with. And in this case, I found this image, and I was impressed by the feelings it caused on me because I thought it was beautiful, but at the same time, the colors and the textures made me also find it slightly creepy, and I like the idea of trying to use this combination of feelings. After having analyzed the data, I worked on the definition of a visual model, of course, an essential step. And this step for me has two kinds of influences I've noticed. The first one is given by the data themselves, of course. So I study them, I filter them, trying to see what could be the most interesting way to give them a shape. And then also the inspiration phase as a role. I've noticed that all the visual elements I filled my eyes with during the inspiration phase help me in defining new visual structures. So in this case, I decided to show the CO2 emissions data for a set of countries. Each radio represents a year. And I decided to use for each country these petals whose lengths represent the tons of CO2 emitted. And after having visualized the data, I really worked a lot on the texture and the look and feel, inspired by that image and also by the feelings coming from it. And when I work on La Lettura projects, I always try to work on different layers of information to give the users the possibility of reading the topic I'm talking about with different deepnesses of analysis. So in this case, the first layer is given by the emission data. And then I added the second layer, the color, that here represents the change in the emissions over the previous year. So red for increased emissions, blue for decreased ones. So here, as you can see, I use the color as tool to help the readers in using the piece I'm working on. And this is the final visualization. So there are certain elements that can quickly be seen, such as the size of certain countries, for instance, and keeping this possibility is very important. But there are also elements that need time to be read in a kind of slow reading connection between the user, the reader, and the piece that is related to that particular usage context, that unique usage context. And when I work on such projects, I used to think about them as a visual equivalent of long articles. Designing visualizations is an act similar to the writing one for me. I'm writing with visual alphabets and sometimes also experimenting with new visual letters. For this reason, it's extremely important to provide the readers all the tools to use these alphabets. And this is why designing a clear legend, of course, it's very important. And after having designed visualizations and legends, it's very important to test them. And my parents are my favorite testers because one, they can be very critical in a constructive way, and two, they are not database experts, and therefore they represent the majority of my potential readers. Important to say that. Here you can only see messages from me to my mom because my dad refuses to have a smartphone, but he's a very good tester anyway. So another lesson that I've learned is that the act of temporarily detaching from myself, from my works while they're still in progress, is a very useful one. I noticed that starting from ourselves can be a good starting point, but then we have to detach from ourselves at a certain point. So the process behind this kind of projects can be an intensive one, and sometimes I have to work on them in a relatively short amount of time. And getting lost in this intense workflow and losing sight of the readers is a risk. For this reason, I think that taking a moment for detaching from my work while it's still in progress to show it to other people can be a good way not to be trapped in myself. So I noticed that when I come back to my visualizations, after having sent them to my parents, for instance, I often have new intuitions on how to improve them, also before reading their comments. For La Lettura, I also experimented combining data visualization and illustrations. This piece, for instance, is a sky map, an evocative sky map as it's seen by the pilots. They have different boundaries and different reference points. And so they asked me this time to combine data visualization, cartography, and illustrations. And this experiment with infographics and illustrations were then followed by a beautiful opportunity. In 2016, I designed a whole book combining these two elements. It's a children's book whose aim is to depict our planet for the children with the tools of infographics and illustrations combined. And I'm designer and co-author of the book that has been designed with Chiara Pirodi, and she's a psychologist expert in development neuropsychology. And working with her was extremely important because I'd never designed databases for children before. And I really needed to understand if my visuals would have been understood by such a young public. And a few months ago, I also had the great chance to experiment for Google. More than 1 year ago, I was contacted by Alberto Cairo and Simon Rogers for Google News Lab to design a data visualization project for Google Trends using Google data as base. It was great because I could propose the topic to be explored. And again, I started from a very personal point of view, and I asked myself, is there a way in which I use Google that can help me, that can allow me to explore fascinating words? And so I recollected that I sometimes use Google to look for the meaning of my dreams. And so I thought that this word could have been an interesting one, a fascinating one to explore. So I've discovered that typing on Google Trends incomplete questions such as what does it mean to dream about, the related queries section provide interesting results, such as what does it mean to dream of your partner cheating or about snakes. And I'd also discovered that typing the question in different languages allowed me to explore, again, very interesting findings. I've discovered that there are very universal dream subjects, apparently, and that there are subjects that are very language specific. So after having analyzed the data, I discovered that there were many interesting points of view from which to explore this topic. And so I decided to have a structure in 4 chapters. And also in this case, after having defined the structure, I really spent a lot of time on the look and feel and on the details, because I really wanted to design a piece with a look and feel able to dialogue with the contents, again, to hopefully create an engaging connection with the people who talks to. And the final project is a website, theshapeofdreams.com, and I can't code, so to design it, I collaborated with Paolo Corti. He's a super talented developer, and without him, all my fuzzy shapes and petals wouldn't exist. So chapter 1 shows the dream subject by ear and language. During the data analysis phase, I really had so much fun in exploring the subjects, and I really wanted to give the readers the possibility to do the same things. Here, the number of petals for each dream subject shows how the interest on the subject increased over the previous year. Dreaming about snakes and fallen teeth or broken teeth are definitely the most recurring ones. Then I created some micro-categories of dreams, such as family, human body, or natural elements. Each radio is a macro-category, to see how the categories change according to the year and the language. Chapter 3 explores the trends for the interest on certain dream subjects, and we found out that there are very interesting peaks, such as dreaming about tsunami, for instance, in 2011. And then I was also interested in exploring how our dreams connect us. So how do the dream subjects, whose meaning we look for on Google, connect different languages? There are some recurring subjects that connect certain languages, such as dreaming about crying, for instance, that connects English and Arabic. And I found it very interesting and also very poetic. So I also wanted to visualize this topic. And working on this project was super interesting, both for the contents and also for the visual experimentations it allows me to work on. The next project I'm going to talk about, anyway, is the most emotional, intense one I've ever worked on. So it's a very different one. A few years ago, my boyfriend told me about a boy he had met, an asylum seeker arrived from Somalia who, talking with him, talked about his journeys to arrive to Italy. And after our conversation, I started to think about how few I knew about this topic and how Italian media tends to focus more on the Mediterranean sea route, but there are often thousands of kilometers before that part and hundreds of days spent traveling. So I immediately started to think about how I would have liked to use my professional competencies to talk about these journeys, sharing personal data about them. And I already had in mind the potential structure of this project, but I didn't know how to find the narrators. And months later, I met a volunteer who works in a welcoming center, and I told her about my idea. She loved it, adding that she had already in mind a group of people who could have participated into the project. And this is how I met MB, SS, MD, AL, SG, and TK. There are 6 asylum seekers who arrived in Italy in 2016, and this is how the stories behind the line, a visual narrative of their journey, started. I've met them in Vercelli, my hometown. They were hosted in a welcoming center. And my idea was to give a perceivable shape to their journeys. During our meetings, I asked them about their travelings from their homeland to Italy, and with the help of Google Maps, we reconstructed their routes point by point. For each point, I asked them how many days they traveled to get there, which was the transportation, and how many days they stayed there before moving to the following place. In addition, I told them that I would have noted down every additional comment, memory, or note that they would have liked to add to their narrative. And this data collection process was clearly very different from the ones I'm used to. I usually look for data sets online, but this time I decided to exit from the digital world, which I am too immersed sometimes, and to go out, meeting and talking with the people who live the topic every day. Because I believe that data visualization can be a tool not only to communicate to people, but also to give a voice to people who don't have any platforms. And an aspect I was intimidated by was the fact that, considering the range of terrible experiences they've been through and the complexity of the topic, I was asking them very simple information. But this is because I really wanted to provide a clean, simple, and rational narrative of this topic. And this point is an important one for me. I think that such a complex topic deserves rationality and also simple clearness to be communicated properly and especially understood. After our meetings, I started working on the visualizations. I decided to draw for each person a line, a unique line shaped by the lived experiences. And this unicity aspect is very important for me. I visualize the day's data as horizontal line, or an horizontal line, to keep the element as simple as possible. The blue line represents the days of stay in the city, and the light blue one, the days spent traveling. And then I represented the transportation as different dotted lines. The final project is a website, an interactive storytelling piece, storiesbehindtheline.com. And again, I can't code, so to create the website, I collaborated with my very dear friend of mine and super talented designer and developer, Alex Piacentini. In the landing page, you can see the 6 lines with initials of the 6 narrators. Each single story is precious, and for this reason, I wanted to make sure to give the lines their own space, showing them at first as black path on a white background. Clicking on data, it's possible to see the information data on the transportation and on the days. And going over with the mouse, it's possible to see the name of the places. The red dots represent the moment in which the narrators decided to share a more detailed fragment from their stories, and clicking on them allows to read them. To give the lines context, it is then possible to see the map under these lines, and this was essential for me. I really wanted to show all the routes, not only the Mediterranean Sea route, that is the one that Italian media most frequently mention. In addition, I also worked on a second visualization, the distances view, stretching the path to a vertical line and adding the travel kilometers in order to provide another clean graphical version. This project is visually simple and without pictures to respect the privacy wishes of the narrators. Represents only a small fragment of the migration topic, and it deals with it from a very personal point of view, a very specific point of view. It's important, of course, to address such a complex and global topic, talking about big numbers and showing the overall picture to communicate it again rationally. But at the same time, I think that also providing such small windows from which to look at it can help in having a deeper comprehension of it without losing sight of the humanity that stands behind such a topic. I also think that rationality doesn't necessarily imply a lack of empathy. When I shared the project online, I received many comments from people who looked at it and who were moved by the stories and by the comments of the narrators. This line, for instance, shows the stories of Eyal, a 17-year-old boy coming from Guinea who crossed part of the desert on foot. I will be always grateful with the narrator for deciding to share with me their stories and their journeys. And SG, a 26-year-old boy from Pakistan, shared a beautiful comment with me at the end of our meeting. My mind is quiet now. I am quiet because I'm safe, and that's why I love Italy. And many readers were moved by the words of Eyal. You have a beautiful life here because you know that you're safe. So many things have changed since the last time I've met them. I live in northern Italy, and I perfectly remember, for instance, the day in which we launched the Google project, the project for Google. It was in March. And at the time, our lives were already changing in a way that we weren't capable to predict, and we still aren't, I think. And during those weeks, I decided not to take any personal initiatives on visualizing COVID-19 data. I feel the responsibility to use my job to talk about urgent topics. And I feel now the responsibility to talk about COVID-19 only when contacted by experts and working with experts in order to hopefully give a good contribution. I worked on similar projects in the past weeks. And I was very glad when the Overseas Development Institute asked me to design a project to show migrants' contribution to the COVID-19 response. I worked on the project again with Alex Piacentini and ODI's Marta Foresti and Amy Leach. It shows examples on reforms, new initiatives, and campaigns to recognize and better support migrant essential workers in COVID-19 response. Each dot is a story. Each tree shows a geographical areas, and the branches shows sectors such as healthcare or agriculture, and also different geographical areas such as national or local. And I was glad to use, again, very simple elements, very simple lines and dots to talk about migrants, but this time to talk about their essential contribution. Okay, time to conclude. So as you have seen, I talked about projects that differ from each other in terms of complexity, contents, and needs. But all of them, from my point of view, are characterized by an interest on the focus that they create with the people they talk to. And it can be a connection, this connection that they create can pass through experimental visual alphabets that communicate topics in their complexity, hopefully engaging the readers, or with very simple visual elements that have pressure and meaningful stories behind them. I'm very curious about the possibility that the database offers in terms of telling stories and creating such connections. And I'm very interested in using data visualization as a tool to communicate to people, and also when it's possible, to give them a voice. So thank you very much for having me.